I still remember the way his laughter cut through me. Sharp, casual, like it meant nothing. My uncle raised his glass, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Designing planes isn't flying them. Tatum." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, because that's what Tatum Reeves always did. Stay quiet, keep the peace, pretend it didn't hurt. But inside, something cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, just deep enough to never heal the same. That was the moment I stopped trying to belong. Because sometimes, it isn't strangers who make you feel small. It's family. And that day, standing there with the taste of smoke and shame in my throat, I promised myself, one day, he'd find out who Tatum Reeves really was. July heat settled heavy over the mountains when I pulled into my uncle's gravel driveway. The sound of country music spilled from the backyard, mingled with smoke from the grill and bursts of laughter that carried through the trees. Every summer, it was the same scene: family gathered under string lights, kids chasing each other with sparklers, and my Uncle Raymond in his element, commanding the barbecue like a man running a mission. I slipped in quietly, plate in hand, doing what I always did: arrive late, stay polite, and avoid the spotlight. No one noticed, not really. They saw me as the quiet niece from Washington who worked with airplanes. Whatever that meant to them. The only thing louder than the country music was their certainty that they knew who I was. When Raymond finally looked up from the grill, his smirk was already loaded. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried fine. "Designing planes isn't flying them." "Sweetheart." Laughter erupted around the picnic table. I smiled because it was safer than not. The ribs on my plate blurred. The world narrowed to the ache sitting square in my chest. A helicopter passed over the ridge just then, the faint whir slicing through the laughter. No one looked up, but I did. The sound vibrated in my ribs. Familiar. Steady. Mine. I said nothing. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's survival. And in that yard, surrounded by family who'd never ask to understand, silence was the only dignity I had left. That night, after the laughter and smoke had faded, I drove back to my mother's old house at the base of the mountain. The wind rolled down from the ridge, sharp and dry, carrying the scent of pine and the faint trace of barbecue that still clung to my jacket. I sat at the small kitchen table, turned on my laptop, and keyed in 2 layers of security. The cold blue glow filled the room, washing the walls in silence. Across the top of the screen, the words appeared: Project Spectre X, Level 4 Clearance. Lines of code scrolled endlessly: flight data, weather calibrations, system diagnostics. To anyone else, it might look like technical jargon. To me, it was a second chance at something no one else dared to fix. 10 years ago, Spectre X had failed. 2 soldiers were lost because of a single flaw in the wind vector algorithm. The man who signed the final clearance before that mission was Raymond Reeves. The crash ended the project and his career. It also stained the Reeves name across every military engineering board in the country. 5 years later, the Department of Defense quietly brought the project back under new oversight. They called me, not to replace him, but to rebuild what he left behind. I spent years rewriting code, refining logic, and building safety measures that would never let a flight go down that way again. No one outside the Pentagon knew my role. His words from earlier still rang in my head. Designing planes isn't flying them. A bitter smile crept across my face. Maybe not, but without people like me, no one flies at all. Morning crept into the house through thin curtains, lighting the dust that hung in the air. My mother stood at the counter, pouring coffee into chipped mugs, her movements slow and measured. "Your uncle means well," she said without turning. "He just struggles with pride." I didn't answer right away. The sound of the spoon against the cup filled the room. After my father died, Raymond had been the one to keep us afloat. To her, that meant his temper, his arrogance, his sharp edges, all of it deserved forgiveness. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said. "I'm just tired of pretending I'm nothing." She sighed softly. the kind of sigh that carried years of unspoken compromise. That afternoon, a familiar voice boomed from outside. Colonel Mason, one of Raymond's old war friends, had stopped by. My mother called me out to help with drinks. They talked in the living room, voices full of old stories and half-remembered victories. Then Mason laughed, shaking his head. You know what's wild? The Spectre X project's back. Some woman rebuilt the whole thing. Has the same initials as your niece. T.R. Maybe that's fate. The room went quiet. Raymond's smile faltered, his hand tightening around his glass. His eyes met mine, steady, searching, and a little too sharp. I gave him a casual shrug. Weird coincidence. My mother tried to change the subject, but the shift in the air was impossible to miss. Raymond didn't speak again. He just stared out through the window, where the pines swayed in the afternoon wind. His reflection caught faintly in the glass. I turned away, heart steady but heavy. Secrets have weight, and silence can crush just as hard as words. That day, I felt both pressing against me. By 7 that Sunday evening, I was back at my mother's table, pretending I had a choice. She'd said softly, "Just one meal. Honey, don't overthink it," as if peace could be baked into a casserole. But peace was always expensive in this house, and silence was the currency. The dining room was thick with the scent of smoked meat and the faint echo of last weekend's barbecue. The same faces, the same stories. Raymond in command, spinning another war tale, his hands moving like a man who'd never stopped giving orders. He brought up the Spectre X project again, his tone casual but sharp. That program was doomed the day they let some rookie engineers tell combat vets what to do. His gaze landed squarely on me. The table erupted with laughter. I set my knife down, steady. Some rookies learn faster than others, I said quietly. The laughter stopped. Even the air seemed to pause. At the far end of the table, Colonel Mason smirked over his glass. Funny thing, the woman who rebuilt that system had your niece's initials, T.R. Rings a bell? Raymond froze. His eyes flickered for a second, just long enough for me to see something fracture beneath the calm. Then he forced a laugh, lifted his glass, and said flatly, "Coincidence." The sound of cutlery against plates filled the space where words used to be. My mother quickly asked Mason about his grandchildren, her voice too bright, too desperate to mend the crack that had already spread through the room. After dinner, I stepped outside to breathe. The rain had started, soft at first, then steady, cool against my skin. Through the window, I saw Raymond sitting alone, his glass empty, fingers tapping the table in that old rhythm he used when he was anxious. For years, I'd looked at him like he was larger than life. Now he looked small, trapped inside a story he'd written for himself and refused to rewrite. I stood there, listening to the rain and the hum of my own heartbeat. I didn't know whether I wanted to fight him or free myself from him. Sometimes silence burns louder than shouting. That night, I let it burn. 2 days later, I was sorting through files in the living room when my phone buzzed. The screen flashed. Private line, DoD clearance, Reeves, pack your laptop. You're needed at the Colorado test base. Final Spectre X demonstration in 48 hours. My pulse kicked hard. The final test, the one that would decide everything, was being reviewed by a civilian advisory board. And one of the names on that list was Raymond Reeves. That night, I told my mother. She went still, then spoke in that careful tone people use when they're trying to keep something fragile from breaking. "Please, honey, don't make your uncle look bad. He's lost enough." I stared at her for a moment, not angry, just tired. "So I have to keep hiding, just so he can keep feeling like a hero?" She looked away. The silence between us said everything. In that moment, I realized my family feared truth more than failure. When dawn came, I packed my bag and started the long drive through the mountain pass. Fog hung low, wrapping the road in gray. I thought about Raymond's voice at the barbecue, the words he'd thrown so easily over his shoulder. Designing planes isn't flying them. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I whispered to the empty car. "I don't need to fly them. Uncle, I make them survive. The words settled in my chest like steel. This time, I wasn't driving toward another dinner or another silence. I was driving straight into the truth. The morning of the test felt like walking into someone else's history. The old airbase stretched wide and gray beneath a low sky. The same hangars and control towers that once carried my uncle's pride. 15 years ago, he called this place his legacy. Today, it would be where that legacy met the truth. The briefing room smelled of oil and steel. Fluorescent lights hummed above a long metal table. The logo on the wall, Spectre X, Flight Autonomy Division, glowed faintly against the white paint. I walked in and saw him at the far end. Raymond Reeves, navy blue suit, nameplate clear and formal, civilian advisor, his hands folded too tightly, his jaw locked. When the moderator began, the air shifted. Our lead engineer, Ms. Tatum Reeves, will present the Reeves Protocol. My name echoed off the walls like an accusation. He blinked once, caught between recognition and disbelief. I started the presentation. The first slide filled the screen. Spectre X, recovery logic. The Reeves Protocol, maps, velocity charts, simulation codes cascaded like falling rain. I explained how the system detected high-risk zones and triggered emergency reroutes in seconds. Then the demo began. On screen, a virtual aircraft took a hit. Everyone leaned forward. The algorithm kicked in. Auto adjustment, rescue deployment, recovery. In 40 seconds, the pilot was safe. Applause broke out. A colonel near the front said it was the cleanest recovery he'd ever seen. I only smiled faintly. Eyes locked on Raymond. He didn't clap. His knuckles were white against the table. When I finished, he stood, nodded stiffly to the moderator, and walked out without a word. By late afternoon, I packed up my files. Outside, the air tasted of fuel and rain. Colonel Mason caught me near the gate, his grip firm on my shoulder. "Your uncle looked like he saw a ghost," he said with a half-smile. I told him he'd just seen the truth. Finally. He studied me for a moment before saying quietly, "You fixed his biggest mistake." I shook my head. I didn't fix him. I fixed what he broke. The words felt heavy, but clean, like the first breath after a storm. 2 days later, it was everywhere. The Denver Herald ran the headline across its front page. Local woman revives failed military program. Reeves Protocol sets new standard in flight recovery. The photo was from the briefing, me standing beside the projector, my name badge catching the light. Tatum Reeves, his name and mine, stacked together, same font, 2 different meanings. I sat in my apartment, the article open on my screen, coffee gone cold, pride and unease tangled somewhere in my chest. Raymond had seen it by now. There was no question. At exactly 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed. One message: meet me at the hangar, alone. The rain was coming down steady when I arrived. The hangar stood silent, the steel walls glowing dull under a single yellow bulb. He was there, back turned, shoulders square, holding a dented metal cup I remembered from my childhood. "They call it your protocol now," he said, his voice rough. "You used my name." I stepped closer until I could see the tension in his neck. I didn't use it. I saved it. The air went still. He threw the cup. It hit the floor with a sharp clang that echoed through the hangar. "You think you fixed me. You humiliated me in front of the people who used to salute me." I kept my voice steady. "I didn't humiliate you. I did what you couldn't. Admit something was broken." For a moment, he just stared, breath ragged, pride cracking in his eyes. Then softer, almost to himself, "You fixed the mess I made. You became what I couldn't." I turned toward the open doors, rain splattering the concrete. "It's not about you, Uncle. It's about the pilots who died because someone cared more about pride than truth." He didn't answer. The only sound was the rain and the metallic hum of the lights. I walked out, the storm soaking through my jacket, on the runway. The Spectre X prototype waited under the floodlights, its engines ignited, cutting through the downpour with a roar that shook the ground. The plane lifted, climbing into the storm, steady and sure. It's flying, I thought. Finally, it's flying right. The sound faded into the clouds, leaving only rain and the faint sense that, somehow, both of us had been set free. The storm hadn't passed. Rain hissed against the tin roof, the metallic scent of rust and jet fuel thick in the air. I stood in the doorway of the hangar, the wind pushing damp air against my face. Raymond sat on an old fuel drum, the single yellow light above him trembling in the draft. It made his face look older, worn down by something heavier than time. "You made me look like a fool," he said, voice rough, stripped of the arrogance that used to fill every room he entered. Everyone saw that name, Reeves Protocol. "You took what was mine." I walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't take anything. I gave your name a second chance." He gave a brittle laugh that broke halfway through. "Second chance? I signed a report that killed 2 men, Tatum. You think a line of code can erase that?" Rain hammered the roof, drowning out the silence that followed. I breathed in, slow, steady. "No. But maybe it keeps 2 more from dying." His shoulders slumped. The fight drained from his body, leaving only the sound of rain and his unsteady breath. "You fixed the mess I made," he whispered. "You became what I couldn't." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just pity, for the man who once believed pride was armor, only to realize it was a cage. It wasn't about fixing you, Uncle. It was about fixing what broke both of us. A flash of lightning lit the space between us, catching the glassy sheen in his eyes. He said nothing. The silence that followed wasn't defiance this time. It was understanding. I turned toward the open doors. Rain poured down my back, cold and cleansing. From somewhere beyond the runway came the low whir of engines starting up, the sound cutting through the storm like a heartbeat. The Spectre X was preparing to fly, and for the first time, so was I. 3 weeks later, I found myself in a ballroom in downtown Denver, its chandeliers glittering against navy uniforms and polished metals. I hadn't wanted to come, but my mother's gentle insistence had worn me down. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back low. No one here would guess that the woman behind the Reeves Protocol was sitting quietly among them, nursing a glass of water instead of wine. When the lights dimmed, the announcer's voice rose over the hum of conversation. "Please welcome retired officer Raymond Reeves." A quiet sigh escaped me before I could stop it. He walked on stage, moving slower than I remembered, gripping the microphone with both hands. The crowd expected the booming storyteller from barbecues and reunions, but the man who spoke was softer, stripped bare. I once believed respect was owed to rank, to medals, to loud stories. He began. But a young woman showed me something else. That true honor isn't given. It's revealed. The room fell still. Even the servers stopped moving. His eyes scanned the audience, never settling on me, but I felt the weight of every word. She fixed what I broke, not for pride, but so others could live. She carries my name, and she made it worth something again. No one said my name. They didn't have to. My throat tightened, my vision blurred. I kept my head bowed as the applause rolled through the hall, loud and long, like rain on metal. After the gala, I waited near the exit, unsure if he'd come. He did. His steps were slow, his face pale beneath the soft light. He handed me a small wooden box, the kind that once held flight instruments. "It's from my first flight," he said quietly. Part of the old fuselage. Inside was a piece of dull silver metal, engraved with the words, "To T.C.R., who rebuilt what I broke." I traced the letters with my fingertips, unable to speak. He gave a small nod, placed a trembling hand on my shoulder, and turned away. No apology, no confession, just surrender. And somehow, it was enough. A year later, summer came again, and so did the family barbecue. The air smelled the same, smoke, pine, and something faintly sweet, but everything felt different. I arrived early this time. Raymond was already setting the table, sleeves rolled up, the sun catching the silver in his hair. When he saw me, he lifted a hand and smiled. "Got your spot saved, kiddo." I sat beside him, a new relative, someone who hadn't lived through last summer's storm, leaned in and asked, "So, what do you do, Tatum? Still playing with planes?" Before I could answer, Raymond set down his beer and said, "Steady and proud, she builds wings." Laughter rose around the table, not mocking this time, but warm, genuine. I looked up as a Spectre X cut across the sky, its silver wings flashing in the afternoon sun. Some truths don't need defending, I thought. They just need to fly once, and never come down again.